Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner and welcome to my 5th Booktube anniversary. It's kind of surreal. I have been making Booktube videos now for 5 years as of the 1st of August. This channel is actually technically older than that. I have content that goes back earlier. I think it's about 7 years old overall. But in terms of Booktube content, which is my main content now, this is pretty much what I do with the channel. It has been 5 years and it's been a ride. So I thought I would do something to celebrate. I think 5 years is enough of a milestone. I don't typically celebrate the birthdays of this channel anyway, but 5 years is kind of a lot. So I wanted to do something fun, and I did put something on my community page and some people shared some really fantastic ideas. So thank you to everyone who did that. I have put together a list of 5 things in 5 different categories to celebrate my 5th Booktube birthday. So hopefully you enjoy this content. As always, if you would like to give me feedback, there is a feedback form listed in the description. If you would like to follow me on social media, all my links are in the description, as well as any other contact details that you might need. The first thing I wanted to do for myself is actually purchase 5 books for my Booktube birthday. Typically, I'm trying to avoid purchasing books that I haven't read yet in physical form. I really only want to curate a collection now of books on my shelf that I have read and loved and know that I will come back to. So with that in mind, I decided to finish my collection of the VIP series by Kristen Callihan. I currently have Idle and Managed, so I have purchased Fall and Exposed, which are books 3 and 4 in the VIP series, which is a Rockstar Romance series. I read Exposed this week and I absolutely loved it, so I decided, what the hell, let's finish that collection off my shelf because the covers are actually really stunning. I also decided to buy Twisted Love, which I have read, and Twisted Games by Huang, which are books that I've either read or am really excited to read. So Twisted Love was her morality chain book, which was a best friend's little sister romance story that was just great. They sort of border on the dark romance side, and Twisted Games is a bodyguard royal romance, and I can't wait to read it. So I knew that I absolutely adored Twisted Love, and I know that I will love Twisted Games because everyone has said it is even better than the first book, and I wanted those on my shelves because those covers are striking. And then finally, I've purchased a physical copy of Hotter Than Ever by Elle, which was the first MMF polyamorous / menage romance book that I read. Since then, I have read heaps of them, and this one is just one that I wanted to come back to time and time again because I think I tend to pick up books now that have significance in terms of the first time I read a genre or a sub-genre or trope that I really enjoyed in a book, and I wanted to add this to my collection. Next, I wanted to share a favorite book from each year from 2016 to 2020, and don't worry, I will come back to the 2021 books in a moment. So one of my favorite books from 2016 was The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky. This is well known and well loved on Booktube. It is a science fiction story. It is very character driven. It is very slow paced. It's not a fast action paced space opera. It is very sort of slow burn in its execution, and it is incredible. It follows the crew of the Wayfarer who are traveling through space on a job to punch a hole from one end of space to the other, and it is very focused on found family. It is queer, it is gorgeous, and it is just one of my all-time favorite books. From 2017, I picked Stories of Your Life and Others by Chiang. This is another science fiction / speculative fiction book. It is actually an anthology of short stories that Chiang has written, and it features one of my all-time favorite short stories, Stories of Your Life, which is the basis for the film Arrival, which is one of my favorite films of all time and is possibly one of the best book to film adaptations I've ever seen. There are so many stories in this collection. They all deal with human nature, where human nature and science connect. Some of them are set in the past, some of them are set in the future, and some of them are very contemporary in nature. They all deal with Earth-based science fiction, with some of them playing around with the idea of extraterrestrial life, but all of them are based on Earth, and it is an exquisite collection. If you are a fan of sci-fi and you haven't picked this up, it is well worth checking out. From 2018, I couldn't not include this book, and it is Caressed by Ice by Nalini Singh. So I obviously started reading the Changeling series in 2018, and this rapidly became one of my favorite books in the series, and it definitely features my favorite hero of the series. You guys know I am obsessed with Judge, so I couldn't not include this particular book. I think by this stage you possibly don't need me to talk about what the Changeling world is. I will leave a link to this particular book and the playlist for Changeling on the screen. For 2019, I've actually picked a older middle grade / young adult title. I always forget which one this is. It's probably more YA, but I read it the same year that I was reading a whole lot of middle grade books because I was suddenly teaching that year level in school. And that is Lockwood & Co. The Screaming Staircase. This one is by Jonathan Stroud. It was recommended to me by Leanne from Literary Diversion / Novel Menagerie. It is a paranormal ghost story set in England in a world where only children and younger teens can see ghosts. And they're the only ones who can see, fight, and vanquish them because adults are not able to see them. That said, adults can definitely be affected by the ghosts and hurt by them, which is why they create agencies of children who go out and hunt them. It is creepy and amazing, and it has a fantastic cast of characters. If you have not picked up this series and you like ghost stories, it is well worth checking out. It's amazingly written. There's only 5 books in the series. You can pick it up and just binge read it. It's great. In 2020, I read all of Jane Harper's books because The Survivors came out last year, and Wild the Dry will always possibly just sentimentally be my favourite because it was the one that I read first. I wanted to recommend The Lost Man by Jane Harper, which is a standalone book, and it is set in the middle of the Australian outback. It is the story of 2 brothers who head out into the middle of nowhere to this landmark in the outback, which marks the last resting place of their 3rd brother, who seemingly has walked to his death in the middle of nowhere without any supplies. And it becomes this family drama mystery story where this family tries to unravel exactly what has happened and why Cameron died. And it is just fantastic. No one writes place like Jane Harper. If you want to get a true sense of the harshness of the Australian landscape, pick up her books because she does it phenomenally well. Okay, so those were my favourites from the 5 years on Booktube, and now I wanted to share 5 favourites so far from 2021, which is sort of spoiling a video for later in the year, but you know what, we'll go with it. I don't think any of these are going to be a surprise for anyone, but one of my favourites was The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. Now, there has been some controversy about this book recently, and I do urge you to go and read about it and know that I'm saying this in terms of from a story point of view. This book is really important to me, and I have done my own reading around everything that came out a month or so ago. This is the story of Linus Baker, who works for a government agency who oversees magical orphanages, and he's sent out to this house on the Cerulean Sea to check on the most dangerous magical children around. And while he's there, he becomes very close to Arthur, who is the manager of the orphanage, and Linus begins to see beyond what his job requires of him to see at this orphanage. And the thing that really struck me about this book in particular was just how well done the children were. Children in books can be kind of hit or miss, and this book is just amazing in terms of the way the children are portrayed and how they interact with the adults. So with this book, definitely go and do your own research and see whether it's a book that's a good fit for you. It is one of my favorites. I also have Neon Gods by Katee Roberts, which is my now all-time favorite Hades and Persephone retelling. If you liked that one throne room scene in A Court of Mist and Fury, you want to read this book because this book does it better. This is kind of a dark contemporary story, but it does feel very urban fantasy in its storytelling style. So be aware of that. It feels very otherworldly, but it's actually not a fantasy in any sense. There's no magic in this world. The 13 houses rule Olympus, and some of those titles are inherited titles like Zeus or Poseidon or Hades, and others are elected titles like Demeter and so on and so forth. You have the pantheon of the Greek gods, but they're not gods, they're people, and they're essentially business people and politicians. Persephone is the daughter of Demeter, and her mother has arranged for her to be married to Zeus as the next Hera. However, the previous Heras have all died horrible deaths or gone missing. And so Persephone does not want this, and she escapes across the river Styx into Hades territory. Hades is kind of an urban myth. No one really knows if he truly exists. And she stumbles right into him, and Hades begins to take care of her. And together they plot to keep her out of the hands of Zeus. Hades is the biggest cinnamon roll of a character ever, and I kind of adore him. This is a really great retelling. There are ties to her Wicked Villains series, so there are some references in here that you might not pick up on if you haven't read that particular series, but you don't have to have read it to read this. Then I have Sweep of the Blade by Ilona Andrews. This is book 4 in the Innkeeper series. This one actually follows Maud, who is the sister of the main character in the first 3.5 books. Maud has lived life amongst the vampires. Maud is a single mother, and she and her daughter end up traveling with Arland, who is one of the marshals of his house, and he wants to marry Maud, but she refuses to marry him, but she can't walk away from him, and so they end up traveling back to his home where she meets his family, gets caught up in a whole lot of political intrigue. Maud is a total kick-ass heroine. She's amazing, and her daughter Helen is the most precious child in a book that I have ever read, and is totally kick-ass in her own right. The Innkeeper series is one that I highly recommend you check out but by the time you get to this book, you will love Maud. Unsurprisingly, Last Guard is one of my favourite reads of the year so far because it was one of my most anticipated reads and I really enjoy what is happening in the Side Changeling world. I don't yet have my full recap and review of this book up, but I have talked about it in a Books Beside My Bed video, so I'll leave that linked on a screen. This one explores the anchors in the Psi net, which are Psi who are so deeply connected to the net that they actually help stabilise it. We have our first disabled hero. We have a really strong heroine who is more than a match for the hero, and I just adored it. So Last Guard, definitely on my favourites list. And finally, the last book is just a book that took me completely by surprise. It's completely bonkers and highly enjoyable and was just the perfect read at the perfect time for me. And that is Smash and Grab by Maddox, which is a queer dinosaur shifter romance story with artifact hunting. It's great. It's completely insane, and one of the characters, Dalton, is just this completely over the top character. I suspect he probably has some form of ADHD, and he's just a delight. And every time he turns up in any of the subsequent books, I am laughing so loud because he is a sassy little shit and I adore him. The next section is going to be 5 reflections on my booktube journey so far. I think one of the biggest things I can say is that over time I've learned that consistency is key, and I've also learned how to create a routine so that I can be consistent with my content. It's not always perfect and there are always going to be times where life just happens, but the journey of starting out with booktube and figuring out what kind of videos I like to film and what content I like to make and what my viewers enjoy watching versus the things that I'm just passionate about. Sometimes there is, you know, that cost benefit ratio where you have to make a decision whether or not it's going to be worth it. I don't typically make content for the views. I make it because that's what I want to make and that's what I want to talk about and share with people, because there's always going to be someone who wants that content. It may not be everyone, but there'll always be someone who values that. It's been a really interesting journey to get to that point and to find my process and to see how that all mixes and melds together to create my channel. I think another thing is noticing how my reading taste has changed over time. I got hooked on booktube, I think like most people, because of the heavy YA content that was being talked about, and that's definitely where I started. When I was growing up, young adult was not really a thing. There wasn't a huge, well, there was young adult books, but it wasn't something that was pushed heavily at teenagers, and if you didn't know what the books were, you probably couldn't have found them anyway. So I think that was a really great experience, because I think young adult books these days are just incredibly well written and diverse and tell really interesting stories that are really relevant to the audience, and I still enjoy picking them up every now and then. I'm very picky about them because I am an adult reader occasionally reading YA, so I am a guest in that space, so I try and wear that hat when I do pick them up. I think the other thing is that it's really helped me move back into my sci-fi roots. I've always loved sci-fi books. I've spent a lot of time reading them. They're still some of my favorite to pick up. Again, I think I've refined my taste in that area, so I know which ones I'm more likely to enjoy. Obviously, I've gone all the way from YA, fantasy, sci-fi into romance, which is not a genre that I would have thought 5 years ago that would be something I would be deeply passionate about, but I am, and I think it's absolutely incredible that this booktube journey has allowed me to grow and change as a reader and to accept that I'm allowed to have differing tastes and that I can like things that I might have previously thought that I wouldn't, and that there's no judgment about that, because I don't judge myself, I don't judge anyone else for what they want to read, and I expect people to be respectful enough to uphold that, particularly in my channel space. I think the third thing is that I've made some absolutely incredible friends, both online, overseas, people who I've never met in person but have had the greatest pleasure in getting to know and talk to, either through live streams, through comments, through chatting on social media. Like, that is a really wonderful part of this process. And then of course there are the friends that I've met in real life. There are some amazing Australian booktubers, many of whom I have met at book events when we were still having physical book events, or at VidCon, and you know, some of those friends are now such good friends that I've spent a year of Friday and Saturday nights watching movies while in lockdown at home, chatting to them on Discord. Like, that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't met them through booktube. Like, I would not have had that relationship had I not met some of those people through my booktube channel, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. I think I've made some incredible friends, and I love chatting to them because they're my people. In terms of my other reading habits, I suppose I'm now more inclined to mood read rather than set a complete TBR, which is laughable because I'm actually filming a TBR video, which I have not done for ages, this month. But I am more inclined to just throw things down and DNF or whatever if something's not working for me, and then just pick up something that I know I desperately want to read because that's what I want to read at any given point in time, which I think is great. And I think I know myself as a reader much more now. I can generally work out based off recommendations for others through brief summaries or content warnings or tropes or things that I know are coming up in a book to make a decision about whether or not that's something that I'm going to enjoy reading. I suppose another thing is Booktube can be really interesting, and I think just filming any content on YouTube can be interesting. My family and some of my friends know that I do it. I don't typically have many of them watching. I know that there's definitely one family member who does occasionally watch videos, but for the most part they know that I do it. They don't typically ask me about it, and it's kind of that weird, surreal thing, which ties back into that online friends issue where, you know, the people who support me on this channel are people who, mostly people who I've never met before, because the real people in my life have other things going on because this is not their passion. So it kind of exists in that weird sort of people know about it and they might occasionally ask me about it, but they typically don't watch it realm, which I don't know, is kind of weird, but is also kind of freeing in a way. All right, and the last section that I was going to share 5 things about was 5 random things about me. This was a suggestion from the community channel, so thank you very much for that. Most people know that I'm a teacher. I talk about it reasonably frequently, but I really do love my job, and I have been teaching now for 12 years, 9 of which I have been, 9? Yeah, 9 of which I have been a foundation/prep teacher, which is the equivalent of kindergarten. And it's my favorite year level to teach because they're just absolutely delightful in the best possible way. And while I love my job, I suppose the last 2 years have been really tough and challenging in that situation because we've constantly been in and out of remote learning and then back in the classroom with often very little notice, which has been hard, but has also been a really good growth learning experience for me personally. That said, at the moment, I think I'm going through a really tough time with my job because lots of things are happening in my workplace in terms of change of leadership and things like that, and it's really unstable at the moment. So while I still have the same enthusiasm for teaching my class, they give me life. I love teaching them. Everything else has become really challenging, which has in turn resulted in me throwing myself into books as a coping method, because most people don't like to hear me complain about work because it's not so much complaints as just needing to get things off my chest. So it's a bit of a challenge at the moment, but it is a job that I absolutely adore. I wouldn't pick to do anything else at this current point in my life. I did have a question around whether or not I'm still planning the way that I used to. So prior to this being a Booktube channel, it was primarily a planner decorating channel, and all those videos are still available. If you go into my playlist, you'll see them. I do not plan that way anymore. In fact, I very rarely plan significantly. I usually put in important dates and things like that in my phone and my e-calendar, and that's about the extent of my planning. I don't really have the bandwidth at the moment to do that sort of planner decorating sort of stuff. I think I have switched some of that into my digital book journal, which is more that decorative side of stuff, which is how I get my creative outlet. But no, I'm not really planning anymore, and I find it really hard to keep a physical planner because it's constantly left somewhere. I have one, but yeah, it's usually just for scribbling down to-do lists. I'm really picky about the food that I eat. I'm really terrible because there are some things that I just can't eat because of taste or texture and or smell as well. So I can be kind of hard to cook for it, particularly if I'm out at family events. Usually if I'm out eating, I'll pick possibly the simplest option on a menu, and I typically cook simple things for myself. I can't say that I like cooking, and if it involves sort of more than 5 or 6 ingredients, I'm probably out. That's why if you see vlogs, I typically am eating similar things. I wish I could say that as a grown-up, I have grown out of some of my weird food preferences, but I really haven't. Speaking of food, if you had to ask me to pick between sweet or savory foods, I will always pick the savory option. I am a salt fiend. I used to be relatively okay with sweet foods, but I suppose in the last 15 years, I've really become less tolerant of sweet things. Like I can still eat them, but I typically can't eat as much of them. Maybe that's a growing older thing. Chips, dips, cheeses, like that stuff, I'm all over it. That's my favorite food. And typically if I'm reading a book and snacking, it'll be something along those lines. And then finally, a lot of my life has seemed to have come in twos. I have lived in 2 states of Australia. I've lived in Victoria and New South Wales. I attended 2 primary schools. I attended 2 high schools. I attended 2 universities. It's a thing. That is my 5 years on Booktube birthday celebration video. I know it's a long one, but hopefully you guys found some interesting things in this video. I am looking forward to continuing this journey. I don't foresee stopping it at any point in the future. I'm still loving what I'm doing and talking about it, and it's just been a really great experience. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you want to leave me a comment, I would love for you to leave your favorite book from 2021 so far in the comments. Or if you're here but you don't want to leave a comment, leave any kind of celebratory emoji in the description. You can choose. surprise me. I hope that wherever you're in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye everyone.